Before any explanation, there's a strange silence. It's not emptiness, it's exhaustion. Nothing exploded. Nothing ended dramatically. No striking scene to justify what you feel. Yet, your body wakes up heavy. Your mind works, but without the will. The day begins, even before you chose to be in it. You get up, you fulfill your duties, you respond. You do what needs to be done. On the outside, everything is in order enough not to raise suspicions. Inside, something no longer keeps up. Because keeping up has always required you to leave something behind. It's not clear sadness. It's not admitted anger. It's a fatigue that doesn't rest when you sleep. An exhaustion that doesn't improve with a weekend. A feeling that continuing the same way requires an effort you no longer have. Rest doesn't reach what was abandoned while awake. You try to convince yourself that you're exaggerating. After all, nothing serious happened. Life is moving on. People count on you. The bills are still paid. The commitments remain. And yet, something inside you began to fail silently. At some point, living ceased to be a choice and became maintenance. And you know exactly when you stopped choosing. You don't live, you sustain. You sustain schedules. You sustain expectations. You sustain versions of yourself that function better than they feel. You sustain a normality that costs more than it seems. There comes a specific moment when this starts to weigh on you. It doesn't come as a crisis, it comes as an internal delay. You respond, but it takes longer to feel. Feeling has become too dangerous to fit into the routine. You smile, but the gesture doesn't come through fully. You participate, but something inside you always stays a step behind. Observing, calculating, enduring. Carl Jung observed, in his psychological analysis of humanity, that when a life is lived only outwardly, something inevitably breaks inside. Not like an explosion, but like a fissure. A slow separation between who you appear to be and who you are when no one is watching. This fissure makes no sound, it drains. What makes no sound tends to hurt longer. And the most confusing thing is this. You can't pinpoint a clear reason for the fatigue, so you keep going. You push a little more. You adjust once more. You endure another cycle, until the body starts demanding what the consciousness has been postponing. There comes a point where the problem is no longer the difficult day. It's the repetition of days that require you to let go a little in order to function. And this doesn't break all at once. It corrodes. You realize it when you start negotiating with yourself. When you think just a little more for the 100th time. When you avoid decisions not because you don't know what you want, but because you know that any real choice would dismantle something you've been sustaining with effort. Nothing happened. And yet, you can't take it anymore. Not because you're weak, but because there's an invisible limit to pretending to be present where there's no longer any truth. You start to notice it in the intervals, not during the big events, but in the small gaps between one task and another. When you finish something, and for a few seconds, you don't know exactly what comes next. There, without distraction, the feeling appears in its entirety. An unnamed discomfort, a pressure in the chest that doesn't turn into tears, a recurring thought that something is out of place but without a clear location. You look at your own life and it seems acceptable. It's not chaos, it's not failure, it's not the disaster that would justify stopping everything. And that's exactly what's confusing. Because when the pain isn't extreme, you learn to tolerate it. Tolerance was the elegant name you gave to keeping quiet. When it's not scandalous, you normalize it. When it doesn't attract attention, you remain silent. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that everyone gets tired, that it will pass. But it doesn't. It just settles in. The problem isn't that your life is falling apart. It's that it's functioning at the expense of something you've been sacrificing without realizing it. Functioning on the outside while on the inside, you operate in minimal mode. You go through the routine automatically. You wake up, answer messages, resolve pending issues, get through the day, not because you're present, but because you know the script by heart. At the end of the day, when you finally stop, you don't feel relief. You feel a strange, almost embarrassing emptiness, as if you spent hours being useful, but not alive. Relationships are okay. Work is okay. Nothing bad enough to justify a breakup. Nothing good enough to truly nourish you. And then a dangerous thought arises. Maybe the problem is you. Maybe you're demanding too much. Maybe you're being ungrateful. Maybe you need to try a little harder to feel good. This is where many people get lost. Because instead of suspecting the structure, you distrust yourself. Instead of questioning the place you occupy, you question your own sensitivity. Instead of listening to the discomfort, you try to adjust even more. But there is a silent limit to this adjustment. There comes a point when living like this ceases to be adaptation and becomes survival. You no longer choose, you endure. You don't decide, you manage the damage. You don't feel deeply, you rationalize. And the longer this lasts, the harder it becomes to identify where you started betraying yourself. It happened gradually, in small concessions, in "it's not that serious," in "I'll look into it later." Until one day the body warns. The body only speaks when consciousness has already given up listening. Not with a spectacular collapse, but with chronic fatigue, lack of enthusiasm, constant irritation, a vague desire to disappear for a few hours without having to explain anything to anyone. Nothing happened, but something inside you stopped agreeing. And when this internal disagreement is ignored for too long, it doesn't turn into a scream, it turns into exhaustion. This is when life ceases to be lived and becomes merely sustained. There's a specific mechanism behind this burnout. It doesn't stem from too many problems, but from too much adjustment. You've learned to fit in. You've learned to read the environment before moving. You've learned to perceive what's expected of you and deliver it competently. In the beginning, this seems like maturity, responsibility, adaptability, and in fact it is. Until it ceases to be a choice. When you adjust once, it doesn't hurt. When you adjust too often, it becomes a habit. When you adjust constantly, it becomes an identity. And identities get tiresome when they aren't genuine. You begin to define yourself by what works, by what doesn't generate conflict, by what keeps everything in order. Carl Jung described this movement as the construction of a persona. Not in the superficial sense of falsehood, but as a functional mask, a socially acceptable way of existing. It arises to protect, to allow passage, to avoid rejection. The problem is when this mask becomes your dwelling place, when you no longer know who you are without it, when you start to feel discomfort, but can't identify the reason. When the unease appears not because something went wrong, but because nothing changes. The persona works, but it demands something. It demands inner silence. It demands restraint. It demands the slow amputation of impulses that don't fit into the role you've learned to play. You start correcting yourself even before you speak, softening your reactions, postponing your desires, not because someone ordered you to, but because you understood that this way everything flows better. But the body doesn't negotiate the same way the mind does. It registers every adjustment as a cost, every swallow as tension, every postponement as a burden. And one day, without warning, what was merely an inconvenience becomes exhaustion. You look at your own history and don't see a specific mistake. You see an accumulation. A wear and tear from repetition. It wasn't a trauma, it was a pattern. You've become so accustomed to functioning externally that you've stopped listening to your inner self. And when that inner listening disappears, the body takes on the role of messenger. It slows down, it weighs you down. It takes the pleasure out of things. Not to punish you, but because it's no longer possible to sustain an agreement that only works for others. This collapse isn't emotional in the classical sense, it's structural. It's the moment when the constructed identity ceases to be sufficient to sustain who you truly are. And from then on, remaining the same requires more energy than you have. It's the soul refusing to remain absent. When this burnout sets in, it begins to appear in daily life almost imperceptibly. Nothing explodes. Nothing draws attention, but everything starts to weigh a little more than before. You wake up and already feel the day as an obligation, not because you hate what you do, but because you no longer feel present in what you do. It's as if you're always one step away from your own life, performing tasks that no longer resonate with who you've become inside. The routine continues automatically. You know exactly what to do, how to respond, how to behave. And that's precisely what exhausts you. There is no choice, only repetition. At work, you deliver. In relationships, you maintain. In the family, you provide. Everything seems okay enough not to cause a rupture, but there's a silent cost to that. Every time you swallow your feelings to avoid bothering others, every time you postpone a decision you know needs to be made, every time you say later to something that already demands attention now, that cost isn't immediately apparent. It accumulates. At the end of the day, when everything is over, you feel a strange emptiness. It's not rest, it's absence. As if you've spent hours existing for the outside world and forgotten to exist for yourself. You wonder why you're tired if nothing so difficult has happened, and the answer doesn't come because the mind searches for events. But the problem wasn't an event, it was the continuity. Relationships that don't hurt, but also don't nourish. Jobs that don't destroy, but also don't nourish. Choices made more to maintain stability than to preserve truth. You start to feel like you're betraying yourself, but you don't know exactly where. It's a diffuse discomfort, a feeling of constant misalignment. And the more you avoid decisions, the more the anguish grows. Because postponing is also a choice that exacts interest. The body feels before the mind admits it. It responds with tiredness, irritation, lack of pleasure. It responds by drawing energy from what previously seemed simple. This is not a visible collapse. It's a kind of maintenance burnout. You're not tired because you've lived too much. You're tired because you haven't lived enough of yourself. And when you reach that point, continuing the same way is no longer an option. You're tired because you've spent too much time outside of yourself. There comes a point when what was once seen as a virtue begins to reveal itself as a trap. Not in an obvious way, but as a growing discomfort precisely in the places where you were always praised. Being mature, being responsible, and being understanding. Being strong. These words have accompanied you for a long time. Perhaps they were necessary at some point in your life. Perhaps they helped you survive, to get through difficult phases, to not crumble when others crumbled. The problem begins when these virtues cease to be a choice and become an obligation. When being understanding means swallowing what hurts. When being responsible means supporting what no longer makes sense. When being strong means never stopping. You learn that you can't fail, that you can't get tired, that you can't disrupt anything around you. And little by little, you distance yourself from yourself in the name of keeping everything running. The world rewards this kind of attitude. People trust you, they count on you, they expect you to hold on. And you do. Even when the internal cost starts to become too high, there's an implicit contract in this. The more you show you can endure, the less the environment perceives your limit. And when you try to change the pace, something strange happens. People find it strange. They get irritated. They ask what's wrong with you, not directly, but with glances, silences, and veiled comments. You feel the pressure to return to the old place, to the familiar role, to the version that doesn't question, doesn't demand, doesn't break with tradition. This is where many people back down. Because change begins to have a social cost, and then the deepest conflict arises. To continue being who they expect you to be, or to face the discomfort of no longer fitting in. You realize that much of your exhaustion doesn't come from what you do, but from what you fail to do in order to continue fitting in. From what you keep silent about, from what you postpone, from what he swallows. Being too good comes at a price. And that price is paid in silence. At some point, the body begins to rebel against this invisible agreement. Not out of rebellion, but out of weariness. Not with drama, but with weight. This is when the question starts to appear, even if you try to ignore it. How long can you sustain a life that functions, but no longer belongs to you? And this question doesn't require an immediate answer. It's only beginning to corrode the old structure. When you finally start to sketch out any change, the environment reacts, not as support, but as a strangeness. You don't make an announcement, don't dramatize it. He's just starting to respond differently, taking longer to say yes, not explaining himself as much, maintaining a silence that you used to fill. And that's annoying. People miss the predictable version, the one that gets things done, the one that can endure, the kind that doesn't create friction. You notice it in the details, in a pointed comment, in a "you walk differently" way, in a "what's happening to you," asked more as an accusation than out of curiosity. It's not that you've changed radically. That's because you stopped compensating. And when you stop compensating, something is exposed. The imbalance that you previously neutralized through personal effort. The dynamic only worked because you were more willing to compromise. The environment tries to pull you back with veiled demands, guilty, remembering how much you've always been there for us. You feel tempted to back down, to think that maybe I'm exaggerating. Perhaps it would be better to revert to the old agreement, even if it hurts. Because breaking a pattern isn't comfortable, and it's not just lonely on the inside, it creates immediate external discomfort. People don't lose you, they lose the role you held. And that generates resistance. This is where many give up, not because they can't handle the change themselves, but because they can't stand the reaction of others to it. But there's an important detail. If its functioning was what kept everything in balance, that balance was never neutral. It came at a cost, and the cost was you. When you start to withdraw from that place, even slightly, the tension appears, and this tension reveals something essential. That his exhaustion was not an individual issue. She was systematic. You were holding on to more than it seemed. And now that you're letting go a little, the weight becomes apparent. This is the point where life tests how far you're willing to continue pretending everything is normal in order to preserve the comfort of others. And it's also the point where you realize that going back to the old role no longer solves the problem. Because something in you has already seen too much. The inner fissure turned into awareness, and awareness doesn't allow for an easy return. From this point on, continuing as before is no longer a neutral option. Because now you know exactly what it's costing. There is a precise moment when exhaustion changes its nature. It stops being just tiredness and becomes internal resistance. Not a noisy refusal, but a silent inability to continue pretending. You still do. He still shows up, still responding. But something about you doesn't keep up anymore. The gesture happens, the presence doesn't. And this dissociation begins to hurt in a different way. This is where many people try to force themselves. He believes he needs a vacation, for distraction, more effort. But the problem is no longer physical, not even circumstantial. It's about identity. Carl Jung, in his interpretation of the psyche, stated that when someone strays too far from their own center in order to maintain a functional image, the unconscious reacts. Not as punishment, but as compensation. The collapse occurs when the lived experience ceases to represent who one truly is. This collapse does not come as an external breakdown. It comes as internal exhaustion. You start to realize that you're not tired of what you do. He's tired of being who he needs to be in order to keep doing things. And that's a dangerous turn of events. Because it dismantles the narrative that all you have to do is endure a little longer. This shows that the problem is not quantity, but rather sustained falsehood. From this point on, continuing requires a kind of internal violence that you can no longer exert. Not due to a lack of character, but something in you refuses to keep paying that price. It is at this point that the phrase asserts itself without metaphor, without softening. You can't keep pretending anymore. Don't fake happiness, don't fake gratitude, don't fake strength, pretending to be present where there is already a rupture. This finding offers no relief. She cuts, because it shows that suffering doesn't come from outside. It stems from the effort to keep something standing that can no longer hold up from the inside. And when that truth comes to light, there's no way to unsee it. You can even try to continue. But now she knows exactly what she's doing to herself. Tiredness becomes a signal. Not out of weakness, but out of exceeding one's limits. From here on, the question changes. It's no longer a question of how to continue. It's about who I need to stop being in order not to lose myself completely. And this is not a question that can be answered quickly. She comes to dismantle what can no longer exist in the same way. From this point on, exhaustion ceases to be merely a state and becomes a transition. Not in a nice way, but in an irreversible sense. You realize that something has died. Not a specific relationship, not a job, not a specific phase. What died was the ability to remain the same person within a structure that no longer represents you. And that's scary, because until now, tiredness could be explained as a phase. Now it reveals itself as a rupture, a breakdown of psychological identity. You try to recover the old version, the one who could handle it all, the one who solved problems, the one who moved forward without questioning too much. But she no longer responds, not because you forgot how, but because the cost became too obvious to ignore. There's a silent exchange happening here, the trade-off between predictability and truth, between belonging and integrity, between functioning and existing, and none of these exchanges are comfortable. Once you cross that point, there is no turning back. You can even go back to the old place, but it doesn't come back the same. Something inside you keeps watching, recording each concession, feeling the weight of every pretense. That's why exhaustion at this stage doesn't improve with rest, because it's not a lack of energy, it is a refusal to continue investing energy where there is no internal return. This is the rite of passage that almost no one names, the moment when the functional persona begins to die. Not with drama, but with emptying. You experience less pleasure, less enthusiasm, less willingness to engage in pointless conversations. Projects that once seemed sufficient now sound hollow. And it's not depression, it's disidentification. The world around us continues to demand the same thing, but you're not the same cog in the machine anymore. This transition comes at a high psychological cost. Because it leaves you between places, you no longer fit into the old role. But it's still unknown who will manage without him. It's unstable territory. No applause, no validation. And here arises a question that is neither comfortable, nor kind, nor therapeutic. If continuing as things are unsustainable, what exactly are you willing to lose to avoid having to change? This question doesn't require an immediate answer. She scores a point of no return. Exhaustion now doesn't ask for rest. It demands a choice. And choosing here isn't about doing something new. It's about accepting that something within you can no longer continue to live in the same way. From here on out, pretending isn't just tiring, it's self-destructive. And you know that. There is a specific kind of silence that follows. It is not peace. It's a suspension. You continue living, but now with the clear feeling that something has been deactivated. The old machine still turns, but without conviction, without internal buy-in. This is the point at which many people try to numb themselves, work more, consume more, fill every space with noise so as not to hear what has become too obvious. But what has been seen does not easily return to the shadows. Exhaustion has already served its purpose. She didn't come to destroy you, it came to finalize an agreement that you signed without realizing it. An agreement where you functioned, but it wasn't whole. Somewhere along the way, you start to realize that it's no longer about improving the life you have. It's a matter of deciding whether you continue living as a persona that no longer holds up. That's not inspiring, it's not pretty. It doesn't come with immediate clarity, it comes with loss. Loss of identification, loss of belonging is easy. Loss of the image of someone who can handle it. And perhaps that's why so many people get stuck here. Because moving forward requires accepting that the old version of you won't survive intact. There is a cost to this. There always is. In The Forgotten Agreement, Luciana Santos describes this moment as the point at which life stops asking for effort and starts demanding real presence. Not as a solution, but as an inevitable consequence for those who can no longer let go without feeling the impact. There is no shortcut to this stage. There is no formula. There is only a silent refusal to continue pretending everything is normal. If you read this kind of book, it's not because you're looking for comfort. It's because some part of you already knows that staying the same comes at a higher price than changing. And perhaps that's why you're still here, listening to the end. Not to learn something new, but because something old is no longer useful. Before any answer, the question remains. It doesn't close, it doesn't organize, it doesn't alleviate. If nothing external has collapsed, but internally you've reached your limit, what exactly is begging to die within you so that another way of existing can begin? If this resonated in any uncomfortable way, let it resonate. And tell us in the comments, not the ready-made answer, but where you feel you can no longer pretend.